products, especially if you are someone who wants to open up an online business. All of the tools and things that I share with you on Thursday evening are going to be helpful for people who are starting out in business. Anybody else would charge you, I'm telling you already, in the hundreds, because I know people who charge in the hundreds for the information that I'm going to be giving you for $10. All right. So if you want a class specifically for what I'm going to be sharing with you on Thursday, I'll have more information on that. I do also do in-depth trainings, but Thursday is going to give you a little bit of each one of them so you can get your head around it. Those of you who are people who struggle, you might struggle with technology, you might struggle with all of the different gadgets and things. I'm going to be helping you and walking you through some of that. All right. And so if you want an additional course that is a little bit more lengthy, there will be an opportunity for you to register for that. But that will happen in the fall, where I'll be teaching in depth on all three. All right. So if you are interested in the overall course, the overview, that's happening Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And you can email me at reachshante@gmail.com for further information. I want to say good morning to each and every one of you and welcome to Daring Dialogues. I am your host, Shante Charles, and today we are in our Teachable Tuesday, which we know is centered around Black history and history in general, but primarily Black history. So, we took a break from our book on immigration, and we're getting back into that. And I'll show you the title for those of you who are joining us for the first time. I'll show you the cover. The book is entitled "This Land Is Our Land." This land is our land. And we have so far we've covered. Let's see. We've covered the Germans, the Irish, and the nativists. We have covered Italians, Jews, Eastern Europeans. We have covered immigrants from Asia. And we are in the subject matter of, let's see, we've covered Latin American immigrants. We've covered refugees. And now we are in from World War II into the 21st century is where we're headed. But we are talking right now about refugees and seeking safety and liberty. And this is right along with what is happening in our government right now. In case you did not hear, that Attorney General Jeff Sessions is now put out a ruling that women and children, that's really most likely going to affect them, those who are fleeing from domestic violence issues and those who are fleeing from gangs can no longer use those as reasons to seek asylum. That is insane. All right? That's inhumane. It really is. But that ruling has come down, and of course, that is going to affect several thousands of people. The other thing that I found out recently is they have just recently bused 1,000 illegal immigrants all the way to California. And for the first time ever, they are putting them, listen to this, in a federal prison. These people have not been charged with anything. They have not been charged with a crime, but they are literally putting men, women, and children, they're housing them in a federal prison. Talk about human rights violations, okay? The prisoners, they had a video, a news video out on it, and you can look it up. But the prison staff is concerned as well because they're like, we don't have the staff for what you all just dropped into our lap. We don't have the staff to register these people. We don't have the mental health staff. We don't have the hospital staff. And you all are just busing illegal immigrants to a California federal prison. You're going to put them behind bars in a federal prison. No due process. no lawyers. You're just going to drop them off there. What could possibly go wrong? But this is some of the things that our government is doing. And those of you all who know how to pray, you need to pray. But those of you who also know how to contact your senators and your legislators, especially over in California, to get on this, please do so. Because this is a disaster waiting to happen. So, we're on the subject about refugees, and we are getting ready to continue our talk about the refugee camps and the Haitian refugee situation. We left off talking about the Haitian Refugee Immigration Fairness Act that offered Haitians the same opportunities to apply for permission to stay in the United States legally. Well, we know that they have overturned that, and now they're requiring Haitians as well to return to unsafe, unhealthy conditions. So let's continue with this particular part of the talk. When she was 6 years old in 1994, Clementine Wamaria left her home in Rwanda with her 16-year-old sister. They had fled ethnic genocide. I did not know at that age what a genocide was or what it meant to kill another person. I grew up with all my neighbors of various ethnic groups as friends. With the first outbreak of violence, they took shelter in their grandparents' house, but it too was attacked. The girls hid in a field. We were hiding for a very long time, thinking that the screaming and shooting would stop, but it didn't. So we just kept going and crawling on the ground for days and days. For 6 years, the sisters lived in refugee camps in various African countries. They were allowed to enter the United States in 2000. Clementine won an essay contest sponsored by talk show host Oprah Winfrey and went on to study at Yale University. She has been back to Rwanda to help others. Wars, genocide, natural disasters like famine, and the need for refuge has continued into the 21st century. In 2004, Congress passed the North Korean Human Rights Act to grant political refuge to North Koreans. The United States had fought on the side of South Korea in the Korean War from 1950 to 1953, which ended with the division of Korea into two countries, North and South Korea. And we know that yesterday, right, a very historic meeting took place between our president, the president of, well, the dictator really of Korea, and the South Korean leader. A lot of people have some concerns about that meeting as to what will come of it. I know I've seen several articles popping up today that I'm going to have to take a look at, and we'll come back next week and talk a little bit about what does this mean for Americans. Some people are seeing it as a positive, but we are meeting with him and we're not addressing his human rights violations. All right. North Korea currently has their own citizens in concentration camps. Okay? So before we all get all jumpy, happy that our president, who is a bit out of control himself, is willing to meet with a dictator who's already committing human rights abuses against his own citizens, let's take a little bit closer look at that connection, right? That would kind of be like our president in the 1930s. That would be like our president meeting with Hitler, and we'd all be applauding that that's a good thing. So let's look at that a little bit more carefully before we break out the champagne and the balloons. However, Koreans at the time did not immigrate in large numbers to America. North Koreans took refuge in South Korea and other Asian countries, but severe famine, which started in 1994, and the brutal repression of human rights led to the passage of the 2004 law. By 2011, Only 122 North Korean refugees had come to this country. One of them was Joseph Kim, who immigrated when he was 17. His father had died of starvation, and his mother and sister disappeared trying to escape to China. At 15 years old, he fled to China and was helped by humanitarian organizations to come to the United States. I had to do anything to survive, said Kim, who swam across a river to get to China. I just didn't understand why it was happening to me. I couldn't even blame it on someone else. In North Korea, there's nothing I could blame or ask. I couldn't find answers. Kim was placed in a foster home in Virginia with children from Myanmar. My dream is to go to college, he said. I like to play soccer a lot. Some say my hobby is studying, but that is not true. I like to eat. In 2013, Kim told the reporter, I did not come here by myself. I had hope, but hope itself is not enough. Many people helped me along the way. This is my message to you. Have hope for yourself, but also help each other. Life can be hard for everyone wherever you live. You may change someone's life with even the smallest act of love. The September 2001 terrorist destruction of the World Trade Center in New York and part of the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., led to two wars, one in Afghanistan, which started in October 2001, and one in Iraq, begun in 2003. The reasons for both wars were politically complex, but for many Americans, the goal was to bring Islamic terrorists to justice and prevent more terrorist attacks. Some of the Iraqi and Afghan people who supported the United States in these wars came as refugees then to the United States. However, from 2003 to January 2007, the United States had only accepted about 450 political refugees from Iraq. Some Americans realized how unfair this was to people who had helped the United States. In 2008, after military personnel who had served in Iraq and the media protested against the small numbers, many more began to be accepted. The total reached about 100,000 in 2013. One of these was a man named Adil Ibrahim, who had been an interpreter for the American military. I never thought I'd leave Iraq, he said. I thought it was home. But after the events of 2005 to 2007, these events were telling me I needed to leave. My friends were getting killed and some were getting kidnapped. It was becoming hard to live your life. In 2006, Ibrahim's father had been kidnapped, and although he paid a ransom, his father was never returned. With a wife, stepdaughter, and son, he felt it was difficult for me to stay there and see that there would be no future for me and my family. He now serves in the American military. The United Nations counts more than 55,000 Afghan refugees who have been accepted in the United States between 2002 and 2012. The number started going down in 2007 when only 2,300 Afghan refugees were admitted. Civil war in Syria the fighting began in 2011, created more than 2 million refugees by July 2014. Almost all of them live in camps in nearby countries, including Jordan, Lebanon, and Turkey. The United States took about 1,400 refugees from Syria in 2012. By early January 2014, some 135,000 Syrians had applied for refuge in the United States and were waiting to hear if they would be accepted. The United States does help refugees in other ways. By 2014, the country had sent more than $1 billion to help Syrians with humanitarian aid. But it is still difficult to enter the United States as a refugee, especially since the terrorist attacks on September 11, 2001. Americans continue to worry about immigrants who practice Islam since Islamic militant terrorist attacks continue around the world. In 2003, the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services was placed under the new Department of Homeland Security formed after the attacks. Many of the rules are designed to keep terrorists out, but how many refugees who are not terrorists do they then keep out? Americans might think about the words of Rwandan refugee Clementine when she said, "There are so many people who have lost their families through wars and genocide and hunger. I'm really grateful for life. I've realized that there is a way that life can be simple, that you can be thankful for the hot water, for the streets you walk on, for the rights that you have, and for having parents. Welcoming and accepting refugees whose lives have been robbed from them is so important," she added. Refugees are going to be the next generation of leaders who shape the United States, their own countries of origin and beyond. We, more than anybody else, understand the value of peace, and we are going to be leaders that promote it. Now, some people would say, now that you're letting all of the refugees in, what are you going to do about the involuntary descendants of the involuntary slaves that came to this country? What are you going to do about places like Detroit, Chicago, Baltimore, that parts of them look like third world countries, that our government is not giving aid to? And so our fellow citizens are looking at the United States and they're wondering, you can send billions across the world to serve other populations that are war-torn, right? That are seeing atrocities, war crimes happen, atrocities happen. But you have places right here in the United States, some in Alabama as well, some in Louisiana as well, some in Mississippi as well, that look like third world countries that are not being served. What do you plan to do for your own citizens? Because the billions and trillions of dollars that you're sending overseas, it's the famous saying, charity begins at home. Charity begins at home. What are you doing? What are we doing as a country to bring relief to our nation, to the cities that look like Iraq? As a matter of fact, they nicknamed Chicago Chirac. What are we doing? How are we rectifying what has happened in our own country? It's a good question. And every time that question gets asked, people want to deflect. But my thing is, don't deflect. Answer the question. Answer the question. What are we doing for the millions of people without clean water right over there in Flint, Michigan? People are still making excuses as to why Flint, Michigan does not have clean water. And believe it or not, a study came out, a report came out showing that it's not just Flint whose water is like that. It's actually several cities in the United States whose water is either as bad as Flint or worse than Flint. So what are we doing? All right. We have to consider that. We're moving into our next book that we're adding to our Tuesdays. And that book is called Stamped from the Beginning: The Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America. This book is dedicated to the lives they said don't matter. It is by Ibram X. Kendi. And I'm going to go right into part 1, Cotton Mather, Chapter 1, Human Hierarchy. We're going to begin today. Human hierarchy. They weathered brutal winters, suffered diseases, and learned to cope with resisting Native Americans. But nothing brought more destruction to Puritan settlements than the Great Hurricane of 1635. On August 16, 1635, the hurricane, today judged to be perhaps Category 3, thundered up the Atlantic coast, brushing Jamestown, passing over eastern Long Island. The storm's eye glanced at Providence to the east and moved inland, snatching up thousands of trees like weeds. In the 7-year-old Massachusetts Bay Colony, the hurricane smashed down English homes as if they were ants before reaching the Atlantic Ocean and swinging knockout waves onto the New England shores. Large ships from England transporting settlers and supplies were sitting ducks. Seamen anchored one ship, the James, off the coast of New Hampshire to wait out the hurricane. Suddenly, a powerful wave sliced the ship's anchors and cables like an invisible knife. Seamen slashed the third cable in distress and hoisted sail to cruise back out to a safer sea. The wind smashed the new sail into rotten rags, recorded notable Puritan minister Richard Mather in his diary. As the rags disappeared into the ocean, so did hope. Abducted now by the hurricane, the ship headed toward a mighty rock. All seemed lost. Richard Mather and fellow passengers cried out to the Lord for deliverance. Using his own immediate good hand, God guided the ship around the mighty rock. Mather later testified, "The sea calmed. The crew hurriedly rigged the ship with new sails. The Lord blew a fresh gale of wind, allowing the captain to navigate away from danger." The battered James arrived in Boston on August 17, 1635. All 100 passengers credited God for their survival. Richard Mather took the deliverance as a charge to walk uprightly before him as long as we live. As a Puritan minister, Richard Mather had walked uprightly through 15 years of British persecution before embarking on the perilous journey across the Atlantic to begin life anew in New England. There he would be reunited with his illustrious ministerial friend, John Cotton, who had faced British persecution for 20 years in Boston, England. In 1630, Cotton had given the farewell sermon to hundreds of Puritan founders of New England communities, blessing their fulfillment of God's prophetic vision. As dissenters from the Church of England, Puritans believed themselves to be God's chosen piece of humanity, a special superior people, and New England, their Israel, was to be their exceptional land. Within a week of the Great Hurricane, Richard Mather was installed as pastor of Dorchester's North Church near the renowned North Church of the New Boston, which was pastored by John Cotton. Mather and Cotton then embarked on a sacred mission to create, articulate, and defend the New England way. They used their pens as much as their pulpits, and they used their power as much as their pens and pulpits. They penned the colony's first adult and children's books as part of this endeavor. Mather, in all likelihood, steered the selection of Henry Dunster to lead the colonial America's first college, Harvard's forerunner in 1640. And Cotton did not mind when Dunster fashioned Harvard's curriculum after their alma mater, Cambridge, setting off an ideological trend. Like the founders of Cambridge and Harvard before them, the founders of William and Mary, Yale, the University of Pennsylvania, Princeton, Columbia, Brown, Rutgers, and Dartmouth, the other 8 colonial colleges, regarded ancient Greek and Latin literature as universal truths worthy of memorization and unworthy of critique. At the center of the Old and New England Greek Library hailed the resurrected Aristotle, who had come under suspicion as a threat to doctrine among some factions in Christianity during the medieval period. In studying Aristotle's philosophy, Puritans learned rationales for human hierarchy, and they began to believe that some groups were superior to other groups. In Aristotle's case, ancient Greeks were superior to all non-Greeks. Just let that sit in for all of the Greek lovers out here who pledge Greek. Ancient Greeks believed they were superior to all non-Greeks. But Puritans believed they were superior to Native Americans, the African people, and even Anglicans. That is, all non-Puritans. Aristotle, who lived from 384 to 322 BCE, concocted a climate theory to justify Greek superiority, saying that extreme hot or cold climates produced intellectually, physically, and morally inferior people who were ugly and lacked the capacity for freedom and self-government. Aristotle, ladies and gentlemen. Aristotle labeled Africans burnt faces, the original meaning in Greek of Ethiopian, and viewed the ugly extremes of pale or dark skin as the effect of the extreme cold or hot climates. All of this was in the interest of normalizing Greek slave-holding practices and Greece's rule over the Western Mediterranean. Aristotle situated the Greeks in their supreme intermediate climate as the most beautifully endowed superior rulers and enslavers of the world. Humanity is divided into two, he said, the masters and the slaves, or, if one prefers it, the Greeks and the barbarians, those who have the right to command and those who are born to obey, Aristotle said. For him, the enslaved peoples were, quote, by nature incapable of reasoning and live a life of pure sensation like certain tribes on the borders of the civilized world, or like people who are diseased through the onset of illness like epilepsy or madness. So, by the birth of Christ, or the start of the Common Era, or the year of our Lord, Romans were justifying their slaveholding practices using Aristotle's climate theory. All right? So again, you see a doctrine, all right? And most of us in the spiritual world would call it a doctrine of devils. You see a doctrine that is proposed and perpetuated through the Greeks and the Romans, saying that if you're either really, really, really pale or really, really, really dark, you are considered inferior. So by the time Christ comes on the scene, this doctrine has been put into play by the Romans. And soon, the new Christianity begins to contribute to these arguments. For early Christian theologians whom Puritans studied alongside Aristotle, God ordained the human hierarchy. St. Paul introduced in the first century a three-tiered hierarchy of slave relations: heavenly master, earthly master, and the enslaved. So, when Paul is having his dissertation about slaves obeying your masters, they took this to mean that this is perfectly okay for them to institute because of Paul's dissertation and commentary, really, on the society at hand. That's like saying, because the Bible records people lying, that all of a sudden lying is okay because it was a fact of what happened, right? So you have people that use this as a way to say, oh, well, Paul talked about slavery, so that means he endorsed it. No, slavery was something that was happening at the time. It was happening during Christ's time. So it would have been dishonest for the scriptures to not mention it, to not talk about it, to not include it. He who was free when called is a slave of Christ, he testified in 1 Corinthians. Slaves were to obey in everything those that are your earthly masters, not with eye service as men pleasers, but in singleness of heart, fearing the Lord. Also, if you look at the translation there, the original translation is not slave, it's servant. All right. So again, people took the scriptures and they inserted their own social order into the scriptures in order to justify culturally what they were doing. In a crucial caveat in Galatians 3:28, St. Paul equalized the souls of both masters and servants as all one in Christ Jesus. All in all, ethnic and religious and color prejudice existed in the ancient world. Constructions of races, white Europe, black Africa, for instance, did not, and therefore racist ideas did not. But crucially, the foundations of race and racist ideas were laid. And so were the foundations for egalitarianism, anti-racism, and anti-slavery laid way back in Greco-Roman antiquity. This God gave liberty to all men and nature created no one a slave, wrote Alcidamas, Aristotle's rival in Athens. When Herodotus, the famous foremost historian of ancient Greece, traveled up the Nile River, he found the Nubians, the most handsome of peoples. Lactantius, an advisor to Constantine I, the first Christian Roman emperor, announced early in the 4th century, God who creates and inspires men wished them all to be fair, that is, equal. St. Augustine, an African church father in the 4th and 5th centuries, maintained that whoever is born anywhere as a human being, that is, as a rational, mortal creature, however strange he may appear to our senses in bodily form or color or motion or utterance, or in any faculty, part or quality of his nature whatsoever, let no true believer have any doubt that such an individual is descended from the one man who was first created. However, these anti-slavery and egalitarian champions did not accompany Aristotle and St. Paul into the modern era, into the new Harvard curriculum, or into New England minds seeking to justify slavery and the racial hierarchy it produced. So, what is the author pointing out? He's pointing out that since antiquity, all right, there were these notions of trying to divide people by color prejudice and by racial prejudice, but there were African bishops at the time and leaders expressly stating that what they were saying was not true. But guess what? Those ideologies did not carry over to the New World with the people who were bringing them. All right? So the Puritans did not bring over the ideas that all men were created equal and that all men were created by the same creator. That's not what they brought over. All right? They only chose to bring over the ideas that justified them enslaving other people. When John Cotton drafted New England's first constitution in 1636, he legalized the enslavement of captives taken in just wars, as well as, quote, such strangers as willingly sell themselves or are sold to us. The New England way imitated the Old England way on slavery. Cotton reproduced the policies of his British peers close and far away. In 1636, Barbados officials announced that, quote, Negroes and Indians that come here to be sold should serve for life unless a contract was made before to the contrary. The Pequot War, the first major war between the New England colonists and the area's indigenous peoples, erupted in 1637. Captain William Pierce forced some indigenous war captives onto the Desire, the first slaver to leave British North America. The ship sailed to the Isla de Providencia off Nicaragua, where Negroes, quote, were reportedly being, quote, kept as perpetual servants. Massachusetts Governor John Winthrop recorded Captain Pierce's historic arrival back into Boston in 1638, noting that his ship was hauling, quote, salt, cotton, tobacco, and Negroes. The first generation of Puritans began rationalizing the enslavement of these Negroes without skipping a Christian beat. Their chilling nightmares of persecution were not the only hallucinations the Puritans had carried over the Atlantic waters in their minds to America. From the first ships that landed in Virginia in 1607 to the ships that survived the Great Hurricane of 1635 to the first slave ships, some British settlers of colonial America carried across the sea Puritan, biblical, scientific, and Aristotelian rationalizations of slavery and human hierarchy. From Western Europe and the new settlements in Latin America, some Puritans carried across their judgment of many African peoples as one inferior people. They carried across racist ideas that preceded American slavery because the need to justify African slavery preceded colonial America. All right? So, we want to start there by recognizing and realizing that people were already justifying the enslavement of Africans. All right? So all they did was they took that ideology, souped it up a little bit, added some Jesus to it, and brought that same ideology over to America. After Arab Muslims conquered parts of North Africa, Portugal, and Spain during the 7th century, Christians and Muslims battled for centuries over the prize of Mediterranean supremacy. Meanwhile, below the Sahara Desert, the West African empires of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai were situated at the crossroads of the lucrative trade routes for gold and salt. A robust trans-Saharan trade emerged, allowing Europeans to obtain West African goods through Muslim intermediaries. Ghana, Mali, and Songhai developed empires that could rival in size, power, scholarship, wealth, any in the world. Intellectuals at universities in Timbuktu and Guinea pumped out scholarship and pumped in students from around West Africa. Songhai grew to be the largest. Mali may have been the most illustrious. The world's greatest globetrotter of the 14th century, who trotted from North Africa to Eastern Europe to Eastern Asia, decided to see Mali for himself in 1352. There is complete security in their country, Moroccan Ibn Battuta marveled in his travel notes. Neither traveler nor inhabitant in it has anything to fear from robbers or men of violence. Ibn Battuta was an oddity. He was abhorred and hated among the Islamic intelligentsia in Fez, Morocco. Hardly any scholars had traveled far from home, and Battuta's travel accounts threatened their own armchair credibility in how they depicted foreign people. None of Battuta's antagonists was more influential than the intellectual tower of the Muslim world at that time, Tunisian Ibn Khaldun, who arrived in Fez just as he had returned from Mali. People in the dynasty, in official positions, whispered to each other that he must be a liar. Khaldun reported in 1377, the most foremost Islamic history of the pre-modern world. Khaldun painted a very different picture of sub-Sahara Africa. He said, the Negro nations are, as a rule, submissive to slavery. He surmised, quote, because Negroes have little that is essentially human and possess attributes that are quite similar to those of dumb animals. And the same applies to the Slavs, argued this disciple of Aristotle. So again, you see Aristotle's influence still having some reach in terms of how this person is viewing and writing about sub-Saharan Africans. Following Greek and Roman justifiers, Khaldun used climate theory again to justify Islamic enslavement of sub-Saharan Africans and Eastern European Slavs, groups sharing only one obvious characteristic: their remoteness. All their conditions are remote from those of human beings and close to those of wild animals, he said. Their inferior conditions were neither permanent nor hereditary. However, Negroes who migrated to the cooler north were found to produce descendants whose color gradually turns white, Khaldun stressed. Dark-skinned people had the capacity for physical assimilation in a colder climate. Later, cultural assimilationists would imagine that culturally inferior African people placed in the proper European cultural environment could or should adopt to European culture. But first, physical assimilationists like Khaldun imagine that physically inferior African people placed in the proper cold environment could or should also adopt physically white skin and straight hair. Ibn Khaldun did not intend merely to demean African people as inferior. He intended to belittle all, good morning, he intended to belittle all the different looking African and Slavic peoples whom the Muslims were now trading as slaves. So remember, think about it. All of this devaluing and dehumanizing people is to justify the slave trades happening all across Africa. Even so, he reinforced the conceptual foundation for racist ideas. On the eve of the 15th century, Khaldun helped bolster the foundation for assimilationist ideas, for racist notions of the environment producing African inferiority. All an enslaver had to do was to stop justifying Slavic slavery and inferiority using climate theory and focus only on the theory of African people. Good morning. For the racist attitude toward dark-skinned people to be complete. There was one enslavement theory focused on black people already circulating, a theory somehow derived from Genesis 9, verses 18 through 29, which said that, quote, Negroes were the children of Ham, the son of Noah, and that they were singled out to be black as a result of Noah's curse, which produced Ham's color and the slavery God inflicted upon his descendants, as Khaldun explained. The lineage of this curse of Ham theory curves back through the great Persian scholar Tabari, all the way to Islamic and Hebrew sources. God had permanently cursed ugly blackness and slavery into the very nature of African people, curse theorists maintain. As strictly a climate theorist, Khaldun discarded this silly story of the curse of Ham. Although it clearly supposed black inferiority, the curse theory was like an unelected politician during the medieval period. Muslim and Christian enslavers hardly gave credence to the curse theory. They enslaved too many non-black descendants of Shem and Japheth, Ham's supposed non-cursed brothers, for that. But the medieval curse theorists laid the foundation for segregationist ideas and for racist notions of black genetic inferiority. And if you go and read the scriptures, there is no such thing as the curse of Ham. A simple reading of the text will show you that Ham was not cursed. All right? It was Canaan. And the reason he was cursed had to do with incestuous relationship with him and his mother. If you go and read the text. All right. So there's nothing in there that says the curse of Ham. But look at how many centuries that particular doctrine of demons has gone on and on and on and on. Because there's still people today that actually believe that black people are cursed because of Ham, and that that their skin color is a physical sign of that curse. Think about how many hundreds of years that lie has continued. The shift to solely enslaving black people and justifying it using the curse of Ham was in the offing. Once that shift occurred, the disempowered curse theory became empowered, and racist ideas truly came into being. And so, this is why we continue to say, and we continue to talk about the fact that the body of Christ has to deal with the part that religion played in implementing the issues that we see right now. Because it was this notion of God cursing black people that became the leading notion in how people should treat African Americans in America. So, still waiting on some of my white pastor friends to come to that realization that they need to correct it by, first of all, renouncing it and calling it what it is, a doctrine of demons. All right. Our last stop for today, we're back in a Black History Reader. All right. If you can see and hear me clearly on Periscope, please put some hearts on the screen. That way I know that you all can see and hear me. I believe my people on YouTube are seeing and hearing fine. Okay, great. Last section for today. We're in the Black History Reader, 101 Questions You Never Thought to Ask by Dr. Claude Anderson. Question number 2 we are on, and this is his current issues section. Current issues. He asked the question, are Black Americans an official socioeconomic underclass? Are we an official socioeconomic underclass? Whether Black Americans are this nation's official underclass depends on the criteria used to define the term. In the broadest sense, an underclass is that segment of the population that occupies the lowest possible position in a ranking order of social acceptability. The enactment of the nation's Constitution in 1789 and the first naturalization law of 1790 established a rank order that placed white people at the top and entitled to all of society's benefits, and consigned blacks to the bottom rank with no entitlements, not even to life itself. The naturalization law declared America to be a white nation, with blacks only acceptable as slaves. So he's talking about the original documents in which our country is built on. In subsequent years of Jim Crow, semi-slavery, and political correctness, a deliberate and carefully interlinked set of laws and public policies assured that black presence would be a subordinated labor and consumer class. Consequently, black people became the designated official underclass, and it has yet to be repudiated or changed. Until that happens, blacks are restricted to conditions that place them outside and beneath mainstream society. Governmental agencies and scholars have broadened and modernized the definition of an underclass as any group in America that lives as if They were in a poverty-stricken country. All right. I see all of my people leaving Periscope and going over to YouTube. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the Periscope and then come back in. All right. So let me do that. Sorry about whatever technical difficulties are going on over here. So let me try to come back in for my last 10 minutes. Thank you all for being patient on my YouTube. Okay. Trying to spell with one hand. All right. They said it was frozen. All right. So I have just come back in on the Periscope. You can go over and check it out and see if it's back. Sorry about that, my Periscopers who are just coming back in. I am also live streaming on YouTube, so you can also always go on YouTube if you're having difficulty on the Periscope. YouTube channel is Church Love 333. All right. So they began to broaden the scope of what an underclass is. So I want you to think about this. According to the government, an underclass is any group in America that lives as if they were in a poverty-stricken country. In other words, it's a group of people who are living here in the United States, which is supposed to be a first world country, but you're living like you're living in a third world country. All right. So I want you to think about all of the spaces here in the United States that if you drive through them, it looks like a third world country. We recently saw an article in the Washington Post about a neighborhood here near us in DC where the renters are going on a rent strike. And the front page of the paper, they took a picture of one of the older mans. He's an older black man, the inside of his apartment that they expect him to pay rent on. And it looks like a missile went through his apartment. Literally. I'm like, are you kidding me? This is right here in DC. This is how the inside of this person's apartment looks, and they're demanding rent. The concrete is a concrete floor, and the whole bottom of the floor that he's supposed to walk on is busted up. It looks like a bomb hit his apartment. The sink is kind of out of the wall, and it's completely rusted around the pipes going into the wall. He looks like he was visiting a bomb site in Syria or Iraq, but this is right here in DC. And it's several people in this one housing area, and their apartments look like this on the inside, and their landlord is demanding that they pay rent while he's refusing to fix and repair where they live. And this is not like small repairs. Like I said, it looks like a bomb was dropped into this person's apartment. And there's no possible way that you can lay down, that you can walk, that you can live. And they expect their rent to be paid. That's ridiculous. This immigration-based, politically correct public policy is designed to shift the nation's focus away from Black people to Hispanics, Asians, or other immigrating ethnicities. However, this gesture changes nothing in the original underclass designation because immigrant groups have always ranked above Black people in the order of social and political acceptability. Immigrant groups are credentialed by federal authorities and are granted access to benefits that even Black citizens do not get. So when I see people put up articles about why are immigrants, or why are African immigrants doing better than black people in this country? Number one reason, because they are viewed as an above class above black Americans legally. All right. As soon as the next generation loses its accent, even those with some color are accepted as white and move into the middle and upper classes. Blacks as a caste have never had class mobility granted that was granted to the immigrants. All right. And if you've been along with us for the immigration study, you already know that to be true. The U.S. Census chart below, real median household income by race and Hispanic origin of householder from 1967 to 2014 shows how blacks stayed fixed in an underclass income status. It depicts the racial hierarchy in our society and presents the reality that blacks are fixed at the lowest income level. So I'm going to show you the graph here so you can see, and it even shows it going through the recession. All right, this is the data. And sorry, I think my rose is getting in the way here. There we go. All right, so here's the data showing you that since 1967 up into 2014, the median household income for black people. All right, then you have Hispanic of any race. Then you have those who are Hispanic, but they are classified along with whites. And then you have Asians. Okay. So they're telling you that since the 60s, our median household income really hasn't increased by very much. That is what people mean by keeping black people in this country at a certain economic level. The difference between 2013 and 2014 median household incomes is statistically significant. Note the 2013 data reflects the implementation of the redesigned income question. Income has been rounded to the nearest $100. So you're talking about 1968 to 2014. That's what? 32. That's about 50 years, almost 50 years in there. And we haven't really increased. We've gone from 26,800 as the median in 1967 to about 35,400. That's not good, to say the least. But if you're a believer, thank God, your value isn't built on this world's economy. But if you aren't a believer, you're probably really angry right about now. And I can understand why you're angry. The census chart shows that at the peak of the 1967 Black Civil Rights Movement, white median household income was $52,200, which was double, all right, what the black median household income was for black people. The chart also depicts the changed immigration policies that, in response to the 1965 civil rights laws, opened the doors for immigrants based upon ethnicity and family ancestry. The newly arriving immigrants were classified as minorities and made eligible for the benefits and opportunities that black people had been historically denied. All right. So what does that do? If you have black people who are coming out of a place of suppression, and now all of a sudden you get these laws that's supposed to be helping you to gain economic mobility, but then that gets supplanted by allowing people who didn't go through your ancestry, who didn't go through your hardships to come into the country, and now those same opportunities are being open to not just you, but everyone else coming in. So what does that do with the wealth that's supposed to go into your community? Doesn't take a rocket science to figure that out. So these newly arriving immigrants were classified as minorities and made eligible for benefits and opportunities that Black people had been historically denied. The massive influx of Hispanic immigrants began in 1970, and the U.S. Census chart indicates that at the outset, their incomes began at $38,900. So they already came in with a head start, well above the income of Blacks at the time. And by 2014, Hispanic income had reached $42,500, $7,000 higher than Black people, even though 90% of all Hispanics in America in 2014 had been in the country for less than 45 years. All right? So in other words, they too got a financial head start. So please stop comparing Black people who are indigenous to this country to people who just come in and are doing really well, because they're coming in with a financial head start from our government, while our government ignores the debt that they owe to the descendants of those who have been here and built this country. It's apples and oranges, so stop making the comparison. Similarly, in the late 1980s, Asians who had been combined in classification with Arabs began to enter the country. Their median household income was $64,000, and by 2014, their median income was $74,300, double that of Black Americans. It is noteworthy that the U.S. Census chart indicates not only that all groups entered with higher income than Blacks, but in 2014, the median household income for all groups was up, while the income for Native Black Americans was headed downward. The downward trend for Blacks further indicates that as a group, they have been deemed the nation's official underclass. But I am so very glad that God does not count me as an underclass. Whose report will you believe? A report by the Urban Institute, The Color of Wealth in the Nation's Capital, the subject of an article in the Washington Post on November 2nd, 2016. The grim statistics in this article on Black wealth reinforce the census chart and are further evidence that Blacks as a whole are the nation's official underclass. The Urban Institute report pointed out that in the D.C. Columbia region, the District of Columbia region, the net worth of white households was 81 times that of Black households. Whites had a net worth of $284,000, and Blacks' net worth in the area was only $3,500. This disparity was even more stark because within the region, Prince George's County, Maryland, has the highest concentration of wealthy and educated Blacks in America. Yet, Hispanic immigrants in the D.C. region have acquired 4 times the net worth of the wealthiest Blacks in the area. Even though they, as a group, 90% of them have been in America and in the D.C. region barely 40 years. The same bottom rung status applies to Blacks in business ownership, wealth accumulation, and in the hiring process. A group becomes a permanent underclass when, regardless of individual exceptions that exist within a group, your rappers, your singers, etc., the group still remains fixed at the lowest levels century after century, regardless of whether the mainstream economy is experiencing a boom or a bust. An underclass the black race and its members are routinely blamed for their own socioeconomic dilemma. Conservatives argue that black underclass status results from failure to take advantage of the limitless social and political and economic opportunities that this nation offers to all groups. They further postulate that blacks are handicapped by their attitudes, values, culture, work ethic, which differ from that of mainstream white society. Blacks did not become a permanent underclass on their own. It is critically important that black Americans understand the disadvantages of an underclass status. By the very nature of its condition, an underclass is predestined to live at the lowest level of the system as beggars or criminals. Neither civil rights nor social integration can effectively help them escape this status. This is why I always say it is going to take God to help you escape this status in America. America's ranking order of social acceptability is tightly woven into the nation's psyche. Some group has to be at the bottom. It is not possible for every group to be equal in socioeconomic status the way this country is set up. The question is, can black people muster the mental focus, the resources, and the determination to break out and escape after so many years of being frozen at the bottom? If someone steals your car, you want your car back or something of equal value to replace it. Black people must find a way to recapture what was lost or stolen from them and use it to escape their constitutionally designated underclass status. And this is why I say, if America chooses to continue in the route that it's going, if our country chooses to continue in the route that it's going, it is going to have to be God that equals the playing field. And believe it or not, some people think they want revival. Some people think they want an awakening. Well, you're going to get a revival and an awakening if God has to come in and equalize what America refuses to equalize. All right? That's the reality. Because as he said, from the very beginning and from the very foundation of how our country was set up, we were constitutionally designated to be a permanent underclass. And the United States has not really done much to fix that. As a matter of fact, they've made it worse with the policies that they are currently instituting. And so, when I say God flip America, I am saying that with the full knowledge that it is going to take God, his power, his wisdom, his authority, his supernatural intervention to upend that which our country refuses to correct. Can we correct it? If we're sending billions of dollars over to other countries to take care of their poor and their disenfranchised, but we refuse to correct the system that was created by our country, we refuse to deal with the poor and disenfranchised here, I think that we're capable of the change. We are capable of the change, but the question is, will we do it? Or will God have to intervene and force us to do it? This has been another episode of Daring Dialogues, and I have been your host today. I hope that I have said something today that has got you thinking. I hope that you will not continue to join in with the conversations about, well, what about the immigrants? What about the Africans who come over and who are doing better than Black Americans? There's a reason for that. They're not constitutionally designated as the underclass in this country. All right? So try not to compare the two. All right. And if you are African and you are watching this video, I need you to stop comparing the two as well. Okay? And understand our history. Understand white America's history in conjunction with Black Americans in this country. Pick up a history book. Go get this one. As a matter of fact, A Black History Reader by Dr. Claude Anderson, and learn about the economic disparities that were built into America. All right? And partner with your African American brother and sister. Partner with them. All right? Partner with them. Their business ventures. See how you can be a person who helps lift people out of that permanent underclass designation. All right? So I want to thank you again for your time and attention. Thank you for the extra minutes that you have allowed me to speak on this subject. We will be back tomorrow with relationship talk. We'll be talking about the history of dating, as well as continuing our talk on kingdom marriages. Remember, light is the most daring opposition to darkness, so please go out today and be light. Take care, and God bless.